Well guys, it has finally happened. The M2 MacBook Air is officially now my top recommendation for the best new MacBook that you can buy. And I can understand that that's a little confusing, right? Because this thing came out back in July. So what changed? Well, not much, but the change that has happened has been crucial in making this a really good deal. So today we're gonna get to the bottom of why the M2 MacBook Air is now the best MacBook you can buy. Today's video is sponsored by Wondershare PDF Element. PDF Element is the fast, affordable, and easy PDF solution for managing PDF documents across desktop, mobile, and web. You can easily create, edit, annotate, sign, and combine PDFs, and honestly, the list of features is too long to even name. Look at them go. Wow, there's a lot. No matter what platform you need to work on or work for, PDF Element just has it all. Creating text fields can be done in a few simple clicks, and you can pull text data even from non-rich PDF documents like this scan of a title page from a 250-year-old book. Just click the OCR button and look at it go. It'll scan and find text in your document and bake it right into the file so that anyone can view it. For all these features and more, and to check out PDF Element, head over to the link in the description below to get started. And now let's get back to the video. So this is the M2 MacBook Air, and I probably don't need to tell you that much about it at this point because it's been out since July, but the general consensus that I've gotten from you guys and from other reviewers is that Apple did a lot right with this machine, but that there's a couple of things that just hold it back from being as clear a winner as the M1 MacBook Air was when that came out 2 years ago. So obviously things like the new design language, this crazy thin form factor, a new slightly larger display, the addition of MagSafe, etc., those are all positives, and I think they make this machine really, really appealing and visually attractive. But there were a couple of things that gave reviewers pause. Number one, the SSD on the base model is a little slow. It's slower than the previous generations were, and it's definitely something that you would notice if you're, let's say, a step above the typical MacBook Air user. And if you are that, you'd probably notice the other thing, which is the thermals. Now, this is not something that is necessarily new. The M1 MacBook Air also had that, but because the M2 chip tends to run a little harder and a little hotter, you will notice the performance degradation a little bit faster in this thing. Now, granted, none of those are issues that would necessarily sway the typical audience for a MacBook Air, but this is a very versatile machine, and it can be used for a lot more than typical MacBook Air stuff, so if you are tech savvy, those things might stand in your way just a little bit. But the bigger factor that prevented this from being the obvious choice like the previous generation M1 MacBook Air is the price. At $1,200 starting, it's $200 more expensive than the M1 was at launch. And that means that it's just ever so slightly less competitive. And keep in mind, we're also now 2 years later and only 10 to 15% more powerful. So when you look back at what the M1 chip delivered at $1,000 in 2020, and you look at what the M2 delivers now at $1,200, you can start to see why this wasn't as show-stopping as the M1. But recently, something has happened which I think could change your mind. So take a look at this. This is the Google Shopping results for the MacBook Air, and you'll notice pretty quickly that we are starting to see some pretty noticeable discounts. So I've got this B&H listing, which I think is quite compelling, and this is a $150 discount down to $1,049, which is actually the exact same one that I have here, the complete base model in Starlight no less. And honestly, I have to say, if you subtract that $150 or $200, it really does change your perspective on this MacBook Air. Because obviously the M1, I think, is a somewhat unbeatable combination of being really early, really powerful. There wasn't anything like that in the Windows competition for a year after that thing was launched. But this, I think, is the closest you can get to that. If you look at a $1,000 laptop from the PC side of things,
I don't think they're as compelling. I'm gonna be honest. So I would say that the closest alternative in the Windows space is this, the Dell XPS 13. Now this here is the base model, and it costs $999. Now this is in no way a bad machine, right? We have a 12th gen Core i5 1230U. We also get 8 gigabytes of LPDDR5 and half a terabyte of storage. So on paper that looks pretty good, right? It's comparable in price, it's comparable in specs, and it even has twice the storage, and that's almost certainly faster storage than this base model comes with. However, there are a couple of things that you start to notice when digging through here that might make a difference. For example, this display is 1920 by 1200. Now, that's not a problem, but this is a much brighter, higher resolution display. It's even a little bit larger at 13.6 compared to 13.4 inches. Also, while we have the same 8 gigabytes of RAM, this, of course, is using unified memory, which is vastly superior. Yeah, and then there's the CPU that it's attached to. Now, the numbers that I could find suggest a Cinebench score of around 5833, whereas this M2 chip is over 8,000. So that is a significantly more powerful chip. And then there's the graphics. The Intel Iris Z graphics are fairly respectable, but even this 8-core variant of the M2 is just better. I would absolutely take this M2 MacBook Air, especially now that it's only $50 difference instead of $200. And the fact that this thing has come down in price is not just good for its comparison to Windows laptops, because I know not all of you guys will be cross-shopping this with a Windows laptop, but it also makes the comparison between the MacBook Air and the 14-inch MacBook Pro a little bit easier to handle, because the problem with these two has been, if you wanted to spend anything on upgrades on a 13-inch MacBook Air, you were already getting to the point where you could just get a 14-inch MacBook Pro, which gives you, I mean, too many features to even list. And you can regularly find these things for $1,600 or $1,700 in their base configuration. So at that point, it was like, you know, if you're spending $1,500 on the higher tier version of the MacBook Air, you might as well chuck in an extra hundo and step up to this guy and get mini LED, get more ports, battery, more performance. I mean, the list goes on and on. Now that this is $1,000, and now that the higher tiers are up to $1,200 instead of $1,500, it puts a little bit more space between the M2 and the M1 Pro. So all of these things are combining, and I think putting the MacBook Air in a really, really good spot. And of course, there's always something else to look forward to on the horizon, like a 3nm chip in a MacBook Air, or the 15-inch MacBook Air that I'm really, really excited for. But the critical thing is that this is now a $1,000 laptop with the current design generation. Apple keeps those generations going for at least 4 or 5 years. The previous generation MacBook Air design debuted back in 2018. The previous MacBook Pro design debuted in 2016. These are designs that stick around for a while. So if you do want to get into it, and you get in now, and let's say you're not that concerned about the incremental performance increases over the next 4 years, you will at least be able to get into this new design generation right at the beginning for $1,000. I think that's a pretty good opportunity. So I know this is probably not the typical time for people to be buying things, right? It's like a week after the holiday season, but that might actually work to your favor. If you do need a MacBook Air, keep your eye on those discounts. I did actually find one on eBay that has dipped under $1,000. It's starting to happen. These things are now a really good buy. And so, yeah, I think you should buy a MacBook Air. I'll buy another one. I'll see you guys in the next video.